No,
get
so
all of these.
I want to flag
back
one
to
particular
India.
subsidy
So,
which even the
let's
RBI
not,
in
change
its
issues.
report
And
has
the
flagged
issue
off
that
as
remains,
the
which
biggest
Jasmine and
the
his
biggest
first,
problem, which is electricity
leader,
subsidy.
Kejriwal,
So
has
Aadil
done
Singh
it across.
Boparai, please respond. As of May 31, 2022, state power distribution companies owed power generation companies at a consolidated level 1.01 lakh crores. State governments owe to power distribution companies 62,000 crores. And the total subsidy receivable by distribution companies is 76,000 crores. So in all, you're looking at 2.3 lakh crores of just electricity subsidy. This is clearly not sustainable.
Zaka, we in the Congress suspect that the BJP and their associates are laying the ground for the abolition of the MSP and the Right to Food Security Act. Let me make this very clear. This entire debate surrounding freebies, so-called freebies, is merely a precursor for the government to abolish MSP, given that the BJP is essentially a party of middle. Point number one. Point number two, and this was said on the floor of the House, and this is a startling fact which needs to be told to the people of this country. Out of the 7 lakh crore rupees of public money which was written off by public sector banks over the past 8 years, and you're right, there is a distinction between written off and whether it can be recovered or not. But however, the public sector banks have only been able to recover a meager 1 lakh 3,000 crore rupees out of this amount. Now, even if you are optimistic and bullish, at best you can recover about 20%. What about the rest? In 2019, the government of India reduced corporate tax. That was foregoing revenue to the tune of 1.45 lakh crore rupees annually. And please see the irony here. When you provide succor or when you provide impetus or capital to the corporates, the BJP labels that as incentives. And when you provide the same kind of handholdings to the vulnerable sections of society, the BJP calls this freebies. Isn't this hypocrisy? And what was misrepresentation, Zaka, when the BJP in 2014 in the run-up to the elections had promised the people of this country that we will give you 15 lakh rupees in every account. That was a misrepresentation. Please understand, legislations like the Manrega, legislations like the Right to Food Security Act have been the legislations which have ensured that people did not starve to death during the pandemic. It was the Right to Food Security Act which came to the rescue of 80 crore Indians during the pandemic, which provided them with free ration, which provided them with basic means of sustenance. The BJP, whether it was the repealed farm laws, whether it is their other legislations, the Electricity Act, etc., essentially wants to favor a handful of corporates, and that is the reason, Zaka. And the people of this country recognize this. There is growing income inequality.
One second. One of the things which has again been flagged in the RBI report, and I want to bring in Gaurav Choudhury to weigh in on this. I mean, there is expenditure and there is revenue, right? State finances are so stressed, and the RBI report says, for example, in the state of Telangana, 63% of their entire tax revenue is spent on freebies. In Punjab, it is 45%. So for every 100 rupees the state makes, it is spending 45 rupees just to manage the freebie bill, as it were. In the state of West Bengal, it's 24%. In the state of Madhya Pradesh, it's 30%. Right. In Andhra Pradesh, again, it's 30%. It has got to a situation, Gaurav, do you reckon, where state finances simply cannot foot the bill? I mean, if they increase their revenues manifold, well and good. But with existing revenues, it has got to a situation where they cannot manage this kind of burgeoning and ballooning freebie bill.
No, absolutely not. You're absolutely right, Zaka. See, one of the problems has, as you said in your opening remarks, has got to do with non-merit subsidies, and we need to clearly distinguish between what is welfare entitlement and what is a freebie. Giving out farm loan waivers or farm income support scheme for farmers or all marginalized communities, which the state governments and the center may identify depending on what they think is, and based on merit. These are welfare entitlement, and it's nobody's case that in a nation of 1.4 billion people, there has to be a way where taxpayers' money or tax income from the government is actually transferred for support of those who live in the margins. That case is not the case we are arguing probably here. What we are arguing is there a case for freebies? And what are freebies? Freebies are essentially promissory notes that comes at the expense of taxpayers and follow an electoral calendar. They do not follow a socio-economic calendar. They do not follow a fiscal calendar. It makes the voting process a transactional activity. Apart from being a fiscal problem, there is also a moral hazard problem here that needs to be addressed. Now, you talked about the state of finances. Let me quote you some figures. Punjab, Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Kerala, MP, and West Bengal each have huge and massive unviable debts as a percentage of gross state domestic product. In the case of West Bengal and Andhra Pradesh, the debt is about a third of their gross state domestic product. In the case of Punjab, it is 50%. That is clearly unacceptable. Now, let's look at Bihar, for instance. 3/4, that is 75% of Bihar's income comes from devolution, which is essentially GST and other taxes and grants from the center. Only a fourth is earned by the state. In the case of Kerala, then there's something called a committed expenditure in public finance, which essentially includes salary, interest, pension, and administrative expenses. In the case of Kerala, committed expenditure is 40% of its income. In the case of Punjab spends about 50%, that is half of its earnings, on committed expenditure. These are extremely worrying numbers. Some states spend about 85% of their income on revenue expenditure. Now, what is revenue expenditure? Revenue expenditure is committed expenditure plus welfare spending. And Punjab spends only 6% of their entire income on capital expenditure. Public debt by itself or borrowing by itself is not just like in the case of households, even in public finances, borrowing by itself is not a bad idea if you're spending that money or the money that you borrowed for creating assets. Just like in the case of household, you spend money or you borrow money to buy a house or create an asset. In the case of public finance, you can borrow and create infrastructure. But that clearly is not happening. You are borrowing for revenue expenditure, which has no multiplier effects. That is where the problem is, Zaka.
Okay. Let me also go to Professor Banik from the Mahindra University.